was reading and was reminded of one of my favorite stories in the history of the church. I want to take you back to AD 156 in the prosperous commercial city of Smyrna. Christians at that time were being persecuted in growing numbers, and these persecutions were spreading all across the Roman Empire. The proconsul, the governor of Smyrna, issued a warrant for the arrest of a man named Polycarp. Now, Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna. He was nearly 100 years old. And so they issued a decree for him to be put to death. And the crowd was bloodthirsty. They wanted him dead. But the proconsul decided to give him another chance to recant his faith. And so the governor hushed the crowd, and he called on Polycarp. He said, "Curse the Christ, and you shall live." And Polycarp answered with these famous words, 86 years have I served him, and he has done me no wrong. How then I dare blaspheme my king who has saved me? And at that, the proconsul gave the signal to execute, and Polycarp died a martyr, the first martyr after the New Testament time to have died for his faith in Christ. And I read a story like that, and I think to myself, what enabled him to have that kind of faith? What enabled him to remain so faithful to Jesus Christ, even in the face of the executioner's sword? Because I don't know about you, but I wonder how I would do if I were ever put in that position. And I learned at one point how he was able to be so trustworthy, and that was simply that he learned to be a trustworthy disciple of Jesus Christ from his mentor, a guy named John. John the Apostle, John who wrote the fourth gospel, John to whom was given the revelation. This was Polycarp's teacher. This was who Polycarp learned how to follow Jesus Christ. And the significant thing about this is because John learned that from none other than the feet of Jesus himself. You see, you might know that John had a very unique relationship with Jesus. Jesus had 12 disciples, and then he had sort of an inner circle of 3 disciples, James, John, and Peter. But within that, John, the Apostle John, was really considered the one closest to Jesus. And there was this incredible trust between them. I want to talk about this for just a moment. Many, many years ago, I don't even know when it was, in the early 90s, I read a book by a guy, and I can't even remember the guy's name now, but he pointed these things out to me, and it so changed the way I thought about things. It impacted me very deeply. I want to just kind of share a couple of these thoughts with you about how John trusted Jesus. And when you think about this, that John trusted Jesus enough to forsake prosperity. The Bible indicates that John was sort of a man of means for the time. Mark 1:20 speaks of the hired men who worked in the family business owned by John's father, a man named Zebedee. And while the fishing business was up north in Galilee, John 19:27 indicates that he had a house somewhere also close to Jerusalem. According to John 18:5, he knew the high priest well enough to have free access to his home. And you kind of put all of these pieces together about the Apostle John, and you realize that John's family had servants in an era of poverty. He had a family-owned business when there really wasn't much of a middle class to speak of. He had a second home in the city. He had kind of a personal acquaintance, one of the most powerful men around. But John, listen, he gave it all up for Jesus. He gave it all up for Jesus. He knew that Jesus would do him, like Polycarp, he knew that Jesus would do him no wrong, that Jesus was absolutely trustworthy, and so John trusted Jesus. He trusted him also enough to risk his life for him. This may be something that we're kind of familiar with, but John, remind you guys, was the only male disciple that showed up at the crucifixion. The women were all there. Now, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe it's because their courage was greater or because their risk was less. I think it's because the guys were a bunch of sissies. That's what I think. But John was there. And no doubt the risk was incredibly high for him. But he gave it all up for Jesus. All of his colleagues were holed up in a secret place with the door locked, hoping to escape the fate of the Messiah that they had seen crucified. I don't believe that John really understood any better than the rest of them. I think that John was just as confused and was just as scared as the rest of them were, but it's just that he loved and trusted Jesus enough to entrust him with his very own life. And listen, I think the incredible thing about this is that John saw Jesus at his worst. I mean, it's easy to follow somebody who's powerful and teaching to crowds and doing miracles. But Jesus on the cross wasn't very lovely. All the external reasons that they would have had for following Jesus, the fame, the notoriety, whatever it might have been, have fallen away. And it was just a naked, bleeding man on a cross dying a horrible death. Easy to trust a leader walking on water, but difficult to trust somebody as they're dying. And yet John trusted Jesus even when he did not look like he was worth trusting, even when his life was at risk. He also, this is something we don't think of very often, but John trusted Jesus enough to stay anonymous. He trusted Jesus enough to stay anonymous. Now, maybe you've never thought of John's anonymity as an expression of trust. And of course, today we know him as the writer of the fourth gospel, the fourth one to write a biography of Jesus' life. But think about this, that never once throughout the 21 chapters of this famous Gospel of John does the writer call himself by his name. He always refers to the other disciple or the disciple that Jesus loved. But he never says, hey, this is John. I wrote this thing. And even though we call the fourth book of the New Testament the Gospel of John, he never called it that. Originally the book had no name. And the title wasn't added until later by people who were looking at it and said, obviously, this was John who wrote it. And we know that John was the closest to Jesus, yet he also knew that his relationship with Jesus wasn't one that was to be exploited. John knew that, but not his mom. His mom, if you recall, his mom approached Jesus one time and in good Little League mother fashion said, Jesus, my little boys are the best, James and John. Give them the best places when you come into your kingdom. I can't imagine how annoyed Jesus was with her by that. But his mom tried to pressure Jesus into letting them have the best spots in the kingdom to cash in on this special bond between Jesus and John. But John trusted Jesus whether he would have been well known or whether he would have remained obscure and his name would have never been known to us today, because John's focus was on Jesus. John trusted Jesus to fulfill his dreams. John placed his self-esteem, his stature, his life's purpose in the hands of Jesus because he trusted him and he knew that he was the one to be followed and loved and to serve because he could be trusted. I don't know about you, but I think that is so needed today, right? I mean, we today look to all kinds of things to build our self-esteem. The kind of cars we drive, the kind of houses we live in, the amount of our bank accounts, the jobs we have. And then when we need a little shot of self-esteem, we'll go to Facebook and we get all uptight because not everybody liked what we put on there, or we look at everybody else's life and they seem to be having so much better lives. And I think that we as believers of all people need to understand that our self-esteem and everything, our life, our breath, and everything we have really needs to be trusted to Jesus because he is trustworthy. I think I told you the story once, but many, many years ago, they discovered in Central Park in New York, there was a suicide victim, and there she was propped up on a bench. And nobody knew how it happened, but they found a note beside her, a suicide note of sorts, but it only had 2 words on it. And the 2 words read simply, they said. They said. I don't know what they said, don't know who they was, but evidently they said something to her that put her in such a state that she thought the only option is just to end my life. You see, John trusted Jesus. But the other cool thing about it is that Jesus trusted John. In a wonderful way, John trusted Jesus enough to forsake prosperity, to risk his life, to stay anonymous. But that, I think, isn't what the most amazing thing is about the relationship. I think the most extraordinary thing is that Jesus trusted John. And that was probably why Jesus let John come into so many special situations that we wouldn't know about. We wouldn't know about if it weren't for John. In fact, Jesus trusted John with his gospel, with his story. The last 2 verses of the Gospel of John, the story of Jesus' life that the Apostle John wrote, say this. Now this is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. And we know that his testimony is true. But in fact, Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room enough for the books that would be written. Man, if that's not something that makes your mind race, I don't know what is. Man, what more could there be than we already know? But John said there's all kinds of stuff, and I just don't have time to write it. I don't have enough pen and paper, he says, because he knew some things. Most of the disciples didn't write other gospels. John's is the fourth, the final one to be written and be incorporated into the Bible. And if you've read all four of the stories of Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the first four books of the New Testament, you know that John is very much different than the other three. In fact, Matthew, Mark, Luke are called the synoptic gospels because they kind of run in a parallel fashion. But John's is different. It tells the same story, the same facts, but just a perspective that could only come from somebody who was very, very close with Jesus. We'll say, well, why was it John? Well, I think because Jesus trusted John enough to get his story straight. Jesus trusted John to include what was essential and to leave out what was unnecessary. And as we just read, that was no small task because there was so much that could have been written. I love John. It's my favorite gospel because it's sort of a more theologically based telling of Jesus' life. And I just love that. There are so many verses and so many things in John that are unique to his gospel that we wouldn't have if it weren't for him. That wonderful passage in John 14 that the kids just kind of sang about, in my Father's house are many rooms. We wouldn't have that if it weren't for John. John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his one and only son. We wouldn't have John 3:16. And there's so many other things. We wouldn't have John chapter 1, which reminds us that Jesus and God are the same, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word, Jesus, was God. That comes from the pen of John, and so important for us to understand. We would have a really hard time with our Christology if it weren't for John. And Jesus trusted him to tell that side of his story. Jesus also trusted John enough to give him his love. John is called the disciple whom Jesus loved. Now, you say, well, how could anybody be described that way? How could Jesus play favorites, right? He's supposed to love everybody the same. That's not fair. That sort of implies that Jesus loved John more than the others, that John was Jesus' best friend. And it was. Now, I don't know about your best friend, but my best friend when I was growing up was a guy named Jerry, and we did everything together. We thought together. We liked the same girl at one point together, so that wasn't good. But I knew I could count on him. I knew I could trust him. A best friend is just somebody that you share everything with, your laughter, your tears, your pain, your struggles, a person that you trust more than anyone else in the world, perhaps. But there was a danger. There was a danger in sort of being chosen as Jesus' best friend. Imagine what such a relationship would do to a person's life. Imagine the enormous pressure that you would have been under sort of to take pride and to let that sort of puff up your ego in that relationship. I mean, if Jesus identified somebody today as, hey, this is my best friend, I mean, that person, they would probably write a book, Jesus' best friend. They'd go on the Jesus is my best friend tour. They'd go on the talk shows. They would seek whatever notoriety they could do. They'd travel the world. But Jesus knew that John could be trusted with his special love, be trusted with his friendship, be trusted to get his story right. Now listen, Jesus trusted John with that gospel. He trusted John with his love. But here's, I think, one of the most telling things is that Jesus trusted John with his mother, with his very own mother. Now, as Protestants, we tend in Protestant churches not to make much of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And she is not to be venerated or worshiped or anything like that. But she obviously was a very great concern to the Savior as he was dying on the cross. In the final moments of his crucifixion, John 19 says, now near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, Mary Magdala. And when Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, dear woman, here is your son. And to the disciple, here is your mother. And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Jesus knew that he needed somebody that he could absolutely trust to make sure that his mother was taken care of. His hands, his feet were nailed. His life was soon to end. According to Jewish custom, the eldest son of a widow was supposed to be responsible for caring for the mother until she died. But he knew that he couldn't take care of her when he was nailed to the cross. He wouldn't be around for her after his death. And we know that at least one of his family members, one of his brothers, was busy spreading the gospel, and probably the others as well. And so he needed somebody to kind of stay put and to take care of his mother. And so among his last words, Jesus choked out, even though he was essentially being strangled, the result of the crucifixion, he chose John. And when all the other apostles fled Jerusalem under persecution, John stayed behind to take care of Mary. When all the others were out spreading the good news to distant lands and going on exciting exploits and adventures, John was there, still back in Jerusalem, taking care of her. In fact, tradition tells us, and it's reliable, I believe, that John stayed there until Mary died, and John fulfilled his trust that Jesus put in him. So kind of the point of this whole thing is this, that we are told, and we've probably been asked millions of times, do we trust Jesus? Do we trust Jesus? And what you're going through, you need to trust Jesus. He's trustworthy. And he absolutely is. But I think the better question for us is one that Jesus probably asks himself, and that is simply, can I trust you? Can I trust you? You see, Jesus needs disciples that he trusts, like John, to take care of sort of all assignments, to represent him well with whatever happens in life. He needs those who will be faithful to him in good times and bad times. He needs followers who will live Christianly, not just in easy circumstances, but in all circumstances. He needs people that he can trust with unemployment, who will still have faith and witness to his goodness. He has lots of volunteers for easy assignments with good salary and generous benefits, but who will serve him in the hard places where there are other people who need to hear about how good he is? All of this is to help point the way to himself, help to point the way to those who are lost, because he needs people who are faithful in sickness and in illness or whatever, because there are folks that are headed to hell. And they're facing those exact circumstances, and they need to hear about a Savior who can save them not just from that circumstance, but can save them for all eternity. And so Jesus desperately needs people that he can trust to pick up his cross daily and to follow him, not just when everything's going well, but even and most especially when it's not going good at all. Maybe some of you have heard, we've talked about it before, but many of you know that Lori and I have two nieces who were born with what the world would call disabilities, for lack of a better word. My brother's third girl, Emma, was born with a rare thing that I couldn't even pronounce if I tried. She wasn't supposed to live. Among other things, she has dwarfism, a profound hearing disability. She's had dozens of surgical procedures on her legs and her feet and her heart. But I don't think that I have ever, in fact, I know that I have never known anybody anywhere, and I've been in ministry a long time, with as many physical challenges as my niece. And yet, she is the most faith-filled, optimistic, strong, and courageous person that I've ever known. Now, I'm going to show you a picture of her. So, here she is today. And even though she wasn't supposed to live today, she's a student at Bowling Green State University. But she even lives by herself at Bowling Green State University now. And she used to live by herself, but now she has a roommate. Show that other picture. So this is her roommate. This is her dog, her friend. Ada, I think, is her name. And Ada does some of Emma's hearing for her. So courageous, so faith-filled. You see, a long time ago, Jesus knew that he could trust my brother and sister-in-law to have gone through so much and yet remain followers of Jesus, as well as Emma. So that's sort of on our side of the family. And then Lori's sister's little girl, Caroline, she was born with Down syndrome. There's a picture of her. That's her big brother, Edison. But and on the other picture, that's at Knoxville Children's Hospital. That's her in the middle. And she just loves going in there and look at her big picture. She's kind of a ham, but we let that slide. But so many challenges, even right from the very beginning. But she today is absolutely smart as a whip. She's very, very smart. She is she functions at a very high level. And as you have known, if you've known anybody with Down syndrome, just a joy to be around, positive, optimistic. You see, she loves life and she loves Jesus. In fact, she was baptized, I think, just a couple years ago. But Jesus knew that he could trust Mark and Angie and that he could trust Caroline to be his followers, even when things weren't going well. Now, I got to be honest with you. I have no idea. Some of you do. I have no idea what it would be like to face the challenges of having babies and children with such profound special needs. I can't even fathom the daily stresses and challenges for years and years. And I'll be honest with you, I am pretty much confident that I could not be trusted by Jesus as well as they could in that situation. But here's the thing. Here's what I want to say is that I think that in both cases, and I think that in our cases as well, and maybe you've experienced this, that the more that they trusted Jesus, the more that you and I trust Jesus with the things that we're going through, the more that Jesus can trust us. The more that we trust Jesus, the more Jesus can trust us. I don't know what it's like I said, to go through something like that, because my children were all perfect, right? Including my third one. But anyway, and so I don't know what it's like, but some of you do. Some of you do. And for them to go to the parents of others, other parents who are going through the similar things, and to say, you know what, God is good. God will get you through this. That means a whole lot more than if I, even though I'm a pastor, would go up and say that to him, because I have no idea what it's like. For you to go up to a neighbor or a friend or a coworker and say, you know what, listen, I know what you're going through because 2 years ago I went through the same thing. That means a whole lot more than somebody who has no idea what it's like to walk a mile in their shoes. And so Jesus, listen, I'm not saying that Jesus causes these things, but I'm saying that Jesus needs people he can trust with cancer to be witnesses to unbelievers who are struggling with that. He needs people to be his disciples who will live a painful life and yet show the world how faithful Jesus can be even in the worst circumstances. And the list goes on and on and on. Jesus needs disciples and people to follow him who live in big houses and small houses with high-paying jobs and with unemployment, with prominent public exposure and people who labor for years in obscurity. He needs people who can trust him to be single as well as people who are married. He needs everybody to trust him because, listen, our goal and purpose in life is to be a follower of Jesus. And sometimes following him means going into places that we never would want to go into. We never want to go into it again, but yet we follow him because he needs somebody who can walk that path and possibly point somebody else to him. But who can he trust? Who can he trust? Luke 18:8 says, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? This is what Jesus wonders. You know, when he comes again, what is he going to find? Is he going to find people who are trusting, who are filled with faith to walk with him? I think one of the most heartbreaking passages in the story of Jesus comes also from the Gospel of John. I think it's only there. I'm not for sure, but I'm pretty sure it is. But in John 6:66 through 68, it says, now from this time on, many of the disciples turned back and no longer followed Jesus. The newness had worn off. People were getting upset with Jesus. Jesus was saying things to anger people because he was trying to break them out of their traditions, and they were getting upset about that. And so from this time, many of his disciples turned back, and they no longer followed him. And Jesus, I can't imagine this scene. Jesus turns to them, and he says, well, what about you all? Are you going to leave me too? Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We believe and know that you are the Holy One of God. But I can't help but wonder sometimes if Jesus does not, and I say this to me, I'm not preaching to you, I'm saying this to me and to us. I can't help but think there are times when he looks down upon us and he wants to ask the question, are you like so many? Are you going to leave me too? Are you going to quit following me? You may call yourself a Christian. You may say that you are, but are you really following me? Are you my disciple? Are you learning from me and doing what I do? We know that when the heat was on, Peter denied Christ. And after the resurrection, and Jesus asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? And what he was asking in these 3 passages, he was asking, can I trust you? Can I trust you to be my man? Can I trust you to be my men and my women and my students and my children in good times and in bad times? Can I trust you to live and love like me so that you may shine my light brightly in this place for more people to be saved for all of eternity? Can I trust you? Can I trust you first and foremost to be my followers? Can I trust you to have your allegiance above all else to me? Because Jesus needs people who will do that. Jesus needs people who will say right along with Polycarp, in good times and in bad times, he is my king. He has never wronged me. And I will serve him. I will serve him who died for me and who saved me.